Hey guys, well, I got bored during lockdown, and one of the things I started doing was modding again, and I found Blade and Sorcery had an excellent community, so I started to do some swords, and then somebody suggested that we make the Gulag from Warzone, so I was like, yeah, okay, why not, let's do that. And so here we go, we're going to make the Gulag from Warzone. I did forget to start capturing until a little way in, but it was only kind of boring block out stuff. I don't think we'll miss that. So here we go. So with my block out, I needed some tile texture. So this is me in Substance Designer, just making tiles. Getting them nice and gritty around the edges, making sure they got a nice bit of curvature on them. That was cool, just cube mapping them to everything. And a few little tweaks. So I was just learning Unity as I started this. There was a lot of me fumbling about. But the block out came together pretty quickly. Blockout came together pretty quick, and now I'm just trying to figure out lighting. Didn't really know anything about Unity lighting, but it seemed to be pretty simple. Very gratified that we can use image-based lighting and PBR shaders. A lot of light bakes, a lot of fiddling around with dynamic lights. My good friend Monkey went into Warzone and voluntarily got himself captured and took some footage of running around the Gulag. So we could see the various bits and pieces we needed. Enabled me to get the correct layout. We also found some maps online. We also found out the Gulag is based on the film The Rock. Just building the barbed wire so we can get a height map of it, using that height map, create the textures for the barbed wire. Yeah, so they built the set for the shower scene in the Gulag, the big shootout with Ed Harris and Sean Connery and other people. I was mortified because I was trying to find the actual set to get references, the location, but it's not a location, it's a set. Just see a few flashes of the video up there. I'm starting to refine the block out now. Starting to build out all the different parts we need. It's a very simple environment. There aren't that many pieces. And this is the beginnings of my trim sheet. So I tried to group together all the little trims, slabs, bars, any repeated elements. I'm going to bake them. A nice texture. I like to do everything in ZBrush as much as possible. This was punching holes for the drains using array mesh. Duplicate that out and putting more detail on it. Nice procedure with the cracked tiles. You make some selections and then you rotate those selections away. It looks like cracks. I'm using noise and booleans to get nice chipped edges on the concrete slabs there. Maybe I went a little subtle. I want some nice interesting curves on the top of the sideboard trim there. Adding some bolts for detail, some metal bands on the other side so we can use it for a variety of purposes. And creating a drain. Just a nice repeated texture there, not going to be seen too much. So I decimated that out, got it into max. Because this is a trim sheet, I wanted nice, simple, clean models, so I built this by hand. Usually I just like to use decimated mesh for high res for low poly stuff, because I am super lazy. I like things to go super fast. We're adding the vertex color for IDs for use as masks and painter, which we're at now. Baking it out. The inevitable return to ZBrush once you figure out what you've done wrong. Setting up the materials. Mixture of substance source and my own stuff. Another couple of bakes as I fix little problems. No bakes were the first time. And then bringing it back, now we got textured models, and then I like to build with the textured models. So this is the first piece I brought in. Drain cover looking pretty nice. So now I'm using the textured models as kind of source material to build everything else. So I don't have to texture every bit, just using pre-textured slabs and bending them around. I thought I might put that sideboard on the wall pieces, but I decided it would be better to just do that in Unity. I'm building the cell doors. And just propagating out all the pieces I built into the block out. Adding a little bit of light so I can see what I'm doing, get an impression of how it's going to look in the end. I probably do too many lighting bakes because I'm constantly worried about what the final result's going to be. Looking at my reference, checking those shower block pieces. Got some nice bars on the top. More light builds. As I became more familiar with Unity settings, I got the light build time now down. So now I'm doing the plumbing, again using pre-textured bits and just modifying them so all the textures stay on there. Just needed one piece of each shower mid and end. I'm going to break it all down into as few pieces as you need. Now this was quite time consuming, getting all the UVs to match the tiles up nicely. But it's worth it, all the little details add up. That became a prefab, as that's used 4 or 5 times. A few stuck in the corners. And going back to refine this central piece, a little more accuracy. This corner was an absolute mess. You can have as many cool tools to do amazing things in 3D as you like, but if you don't know how to sort out those nasty little messes you get, you're not a 3D artist, man. So a lot of hand UVing again to get things nice and lined up. I'm using the trim sheet on other models because I have a strip of metal and a strip of concrete. So I use that, call it UV hacking. Those big curved shower backs, I just UV'd one tile over them temporarily. I know that later on I'm going to go back and do a better model for them. So that ended up quite nice with nice rounded edges. Now I'm building out some more detail into the supports using those strips of already textured metal band to enhance the detail. More tile matching. This was a pain in the bottom. Getting all the tiles set up straight. Yep, not much more to talk about here. Matching tiles. Again, if you don't do it, all the little cheap things add up and the whole effect is cheapened. I started erasing my symmetry modifiers and making actual mesh so that I could have unique texture cover the whole of it. You don't really want the mirrored butterflying effect everywhere. And then again, taking pieces that I'd already made, complete with texture, modifying them to complete that unique piece of shower plumbing in the center. A lot of tweaks. Now I need a concrete texture, so I just go into Painter with a single plane. This is a good way of using Painter just as a texture generator. And I bake out the concrete onto a single plane. Now I got hold of Amplify Shader Editor, and I made myself a custom shader that uses vertex painting, so I can go and paint vertex color on. And what that's enabled me to do is use the vertex color as a mask, so that I can paint an overlaid piece of additional texture on. And this is great because it means that you can break up tiled textures and paint transitions, because a lot of 3D modeling is about getting rid of the clean look of pure 3D models. So I like to paint edges a lot. Make sure you got scatter in the edges, make sure the textures are leading the eye towards the dark corners, and especially in a nice environment like this. But there was a lot of polybrush painting. The tool's called Polybrush. It's a freely available part of Unity. It does mean you have to have additional geometry and big flat surfaces because you need vertices to paint on. Now getting into the small miscellaneous details, made myself a lamp. Get that cable wrapped around for some more interest. Couple of power boxes, light switches, bits and pieces, just riffing here. I didn't really know specifically what I was going to need. Usually I do this in high poly first, but I thought it might be better to do the low poly models. And John. They found a nice reference of a metallic prison toilet. Only the finest comfort items for our Gulag inmates. Now I have all my trim pieces, it's time to do the detail. I take them into ZBrush, high poly them, start adding details like hinges, making sure the surfaces are smooth. A little bit of kit bash, using the same hinges on the locker. Adding the little vents in the locker. And then my favorite part, weathering and detailing. Putting the handle on. Mashing some dents into it. I love doing dents. Array mesh was useful for the shower head. With rotary symmetry. Used edge loops to pull out a panel on the power box, and they just got some techie looking stuff and bashed it in there. Used that weld brush to add some welding detail. And then again with the damn standard brush set on really low, just knock some dents into there. Now, I knew I was going to need chains. I thought I'd be cheeky, so I modeled 3 different chain links, which should give me a nice variation later. Using my stash of kit bash bits to add a nice techie looking door lock. A sliding rack for the top and bottom of the door. It's all little pieces that I know later I can use to build up into the detailed parts. And I'll do that in my 3D app rather than in ZBrush. Dents and scratches. A lot of the surface detail will go on in texture, but you can't beat a nice high poly. So now the UVing, a lot of hand work here, but a decent 3D app will make that pretty quick. Just roughly following a decimated version of my high poly that I brought out of ZBrush. Now I'm going in and grouping everything up, giving it ID for masks again. Doing a bake, fixing things, doing another bake. I actually figured out I had to add edge loops on the low poly model so that the average normals at corners did not skew the detail that was being baked. I just copied over my materials from the trim sheet and used them again. So we got a nice consistency with materials. A substance painter for you. Copy all that stuff over. So now all my trim materials are UV'd, baked, textured. I'm breaking them up now, using the parts to build the larger bits I need. The cell doors. A little test piece of chain. We're going to do some more chain later, but I just wanted a little piece to play with. And then I realized I'd forgotten to put a hinge on the toilet seat, so I had to go back, add it, bake it again. And that was a pain in the bum. Now the payoff. Getting all the detail bits in. First thing I did was replace all my locker doors. They were looking pretty good. The supports for the barbed wire. And now I got some detail pieces for my cells. Some manacles in the cells, put the lamps on the roof. Didn't add an emissive channel in my material, so I had to do that. More light bakes. The detail's starting to come in now. The poly painting's really helping it. Trying to get an internally lit effect for that, but it was just leaking into the cables, so the cables were illuminated, which wasn't great. Starting to add the rest of the details into the rest of the map now. Use Pro Builder to figure out how many steps I needed. I wasn't using a custom floor piece up there, I was just using a wall knocked on its side, which was probably not great. So I went back and did a proper floor piece. Now this piece was awkward. I did it in Pro Builder, exported it, then went and cleaned it up in Max. A lot of fiddling about with this shape. No real reference to go on. This piece doesn't exist in the real Gulag. We just wanted an area to have steps in. Look at the steps, being careful to add variation on all the different steps. Can't all have the same texture. Now I broke the cell out into a prefab and I'm using the details to add some life to it. Then placing the new floor pieces. More light builds. Gotta make sure that light build looked good. And then I started to do some little VR tests, which will they won't look good in this time lapse, but it was fun just to walk around finally and see it in first person. Now I'm doing physics analysis, having a look at the walls. It occurs to me that I did not do the trim on that piece, so I went back and did that. Now Unity doesn't like flipping stuff. In Unreal I just take that whole section and flip it, but Unity doesn't like flipping stuff. It tends to have weird looking normals when you bake the light, so I was rotating it 90 degrees and of course nothing quite matched up, so there's a lot of fiddling about, going and covering gaps and stuff, and a lot of trim work to do. And I figured out I needed some more height in there. So I went and increased the height of everything, give it better ceilings, and I put in a skylight as our main source of light. In the real Gulag, there's just a hole in the roof there. And completing the detail, completing the trim, just propagating out all the details I've done, more light building. And a big pass on poly painting all the bare walls. I ran into some problems with poly paint where it was conflicting and making light maps not work properly, so I had to rip the poly paint off quite a few things and put it back on after I dealt with the light maps. But in general it worked pretty well. It does mean you have more batches though, because every time you poly paint something you're making that a unique mesh. So that prevents batching from happening. But it looks so good, nobody cares. Now I'm having another little test in VR. Fascinated by my own work, just wandering around there, poking stuff. Poke, poke, poke. Now I'm going to do the chains, so stacked up a bunch of chain, used the max long spline modifier to give myself some nice hanging chain effects, and realized I needed a bed for the cells. And this is another cool part where I'm using lots of pre-textured bits and kit bashing them together. I didn't make any new parts for the bed, I just assembled it out of existing parts. Tried to give the bed some broken springs and stuff to give it some texture. Oh yeah, right there. I couldn't be bothered to make a sink for the cells, so the sink is just the toilet bowl with a shower head in it. because they're just prisoners. More fiddling around and refining edges and stuff, matching the tiles up. Again, if you don't do this kind of thing, the cheapness adds up and you get a combined look that's cheap. Now, some fun with cloth. I wanted some rags to strew around the cell, so I used Marvelous Designer, where I can use physics cloth. And I just strewed around some rags. Just pull them around, export, pull them around, export. I used a little block to give me an edge to drape them over. I took them in a ZBrush. Then did my shrink wrapping technique, where I just unified skin everything, project it down, decimate it, do some really rough UV mapping using polygroups. That works absolutely fine. Into Baker. Give it some rough old cloth texture. And then add a lot of dirt, blood, poop, and every venereal disease known to man. And then I got my shitty rags. And I start strewing them around. Trouble with very detailed meshes and static light baking is that you often don't get the full effect of the normal map, so these only work really nicely if they're under per pixel lighting. But they weren't so bad. More light baking. So now I'm fiddling around with individual reflection probes, and I decide that the corridors need an arched roof. So I go back into my modeler, start making an arched roof piece, and I know the arched roof is going to need an end. So I make one of those as well. Smash that in. Start using some more trim pieces. And the skylight looked like it needed some god rays. And of course we can't have those kind of effects in the lightweight render pipeline, so I gotta fake them. Made myself a smoke texture, tiled it up. Made myself a special shader using Fresnel so that when you look at it at an angle you don't get the edges, so that kind of looks ethereal and ghostly. Give it an animated cloud texture. It started to look pretty atmospheric in there. Flung some shit hanging around on the bars on the cell roof. More use of pre-existing trim parts, just cut and bent so I didn't have to specifically texture them. I should have prefabbed a lot more stuff, but most of this was on grid, so I was able to snap it. Putting the lights in the arched roof, using a shower head liberally to be a socket for the lamps. More trim work. Every area that didn't have a trim edge needs a trim edge. That makes it look like architecture rather than my first 3D cube. More rags, more detail. To correct some issues with corners of stairs and the navigation mesh. Thanks to the guys in the BAS Discord for helping me out with that. Trim, 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 trim. All my life, bane of my life, doing trim. But it looks good. It's worth it. Fitting out the roof, doing poly painting on the roof, making sure you get all those edges nice and crispy and dark. A little bit more reference, more lighting builds. Starting to look near final now, but it's still a little bit bare, a little bit clinical. So after I finished the trim pass, I knew I had to do something else to push the detail level on the floors. Oh yeah, I tried to make the doors physically hinge. At this point I haven't got them working, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm pretty sure I can get them working. The nav mesh so the bots can move around. Another little 3D test. So yeah, I decided to do some scatter. Whenever I do scatter, I like to do it naturally. Placing lots of little bits is a pain in the bum. So I used physics and Max. I broke apart some tiles, copied them out a bunch, and then just dropped them into a little container, and that made some nice little arrangements, which I then exported. And some of them were up against corners, and some of them were all out in the open, and some of them were up in a line against the wall. and that worked pretty good. So now I had to go and make a broken version of the tiles, because although the dirt poly paint was working really well, the Gulag has a lot of broken tiles, so went back to the substance for this, made myself a broken version of the tiles, using some offset Voronoi cell shading, even modeled the grout shape in the tiles to give it a bit of interest. Came up with a nice tiling broken version, went back to my material, added a second layer, also controlled by vert paint. So now I split the vert painting into two different channels. The red channel now controls the mold and mildew, and the green channel now controls the broken tiles. So I was able to go around and paint broken tiles, and it looks really naturalistic. And where you got a line of walls that are all the same, you can paint variation on it. And the broken tiles had to also be painted, but I didn't want to use poly paint on those, so I just assigned vertex color in max, which achieves the same result when they're given the same material. More placement of scatter, liberally, put that shit everywhere. More light builds, starting to look real ruined now, which is cool. Getting the dilapidated effect. Thickening up the barbed wire. And now I knew I had to do some broken parts, so this was going to be a pain in the ass. The upper walls needed a gap so that we could jump down. That doesn't happen in the real Gulag because you're not supposed to be able to get down. And there was also the broken shower end as well. So, after ZBrush, used booleans to carve it out. Added loads of rocks, embedded them in, and went over with the layer brush to flake off bits and pieces. Decimate, shrink wrap, then decimate. Really rough UVing. So I had my high poly models of the broken edges. But the only way I was going to get those to match up perfectly with the low poly models was by hand. So I got low poly models from ZBrush, which featured the broken parts. And then I had to take them back to max and vertex by vertex match them up with the original mesh, to cut into the original mesh in a similar way and then merge them up. So this was boring. I think this was most of an evening's work, vertex by vertex, just going around and merging my new low poly broken part with the low poly not broken part. I couldn't think of a better way of doing this. I could have baked the whole thing again, but it wouldn't have been consistent, it wouldn't have used the same materials. No, I just cut it in. A lot of hand modeling here that probably if I'd have been cleverer I wouldn't have had to do. But it worked, and it produced quite a nice result. I did all this before I baked them so that I wouldn't run the danger of having to change the low poly models of the broken parts, which would have meant I would have had to rebake it anyway. Lots of individual vertices to pull around, lots of topology problems, cutting in a lower res line around those to walk the topology back to something more manageable. Then UVing them. I was trying to keep the UVs that ZBrush generates because ZBrush is really good at uncrinkling very crinkly things with its LSCM mapping. But in the end I think I just got frustrated and plain unmapped them. Finally, they're ready to bake. So with those textures baked, come back in the max, integrate everything together. Now we got nice broken edges. And on this texture sheet I had some room, so I did the shower backs. Needed to be nice and grimy, and then UV'd them with a little bit of variation. And I was just tweaking, adding extra details, a bit more poly painting, putting down more scatter, double checking on light maps. Unfortunately, one of the most important parts of the map I didn't actually remember to capture, which was the making of the babby. We made a babby. Someone suggested that there should be a horrific child doll somewhere in the Gulag, so I made one from scratch. I was about to download one, but then I thought, this is 100% scratch built so far. Don't want to spoil my record. But I was able to go back into my ZBrush undo files to show you the short clip of babby being made. So this is how we make babby. This is where babby comes from. So now we go on to the signage. This really helps sell a world. And I very badly translated a bunch of phrases into Russian and attempted to draw them. I appropriated several Razzle covers, some Playboy articles, and a couple of pages of Women's Weekly, and a couple of 80s game ads. And I intend to strew them about the world. I got some random Polaroids from the internet, random Russian Christmas cards, picture of the missus, for good measure. Give it all a bit of grunge and grime, take it into max, cut it up, do some wrinkled corners. This really sells like strewn paper. Strewn paper doesn't always go absolutely perfectly flat onto the floor. We just ruffle it up a bit. Then split them all up. Export the buggers. Assign all the materials in Unity. This is something that can't be done in mass, which is a real pain in the arse. Made myself a nice translucent material with the correct settings. Start to distribute them around. Try to get a little bit of an individualized feel in every cell. No substitute for effort here. Just got to do as much as you can bear. Ah, yeah, I forgot. You definitely want to be keeping track of your days in the Gulag. Numbering all the cells. And then some last tweaks and details. Get some custom curved numbers at the end of the shower stalls. And lastly, the trim in the center needed to be sorted out. So again, using already textured pieces, made myself a circular drain cover. A little bit fiddly, not impossible. Fitted that up to the drains. I actually made the drain covers transparent so that you could see the drain beneath the drain cover for a little bit of parallax. It turned out to be almost pointless, but not quite. And a few things that I forgot, like these floor panels here needed to have some proper texturing on them again and use the trim sheets. Some weird problems with importing at this stage, I think only because of the poly paint. So this is just me doing a few more light tweaks. Getting the resolution nice. Adding a few more little details. That is pretty much it. So that was a 1 week build, 100% scratch built. Some UV mapping that needed to be done to get that perfect detail. Oh yeah, one more additional floor panel for the end of the supports. And that was it. He was ready to bundle up and test in Blade and Sorcery. I thought it was a real cool idea because the Gulag is a nice simple map. It's a really well-defined fighting area. It's got multiple levels, and there's really only about 8 different models in the whole thing. I wanted to make a slightly dirtier and filthier Gulag than the actual Warzone Gulag, which is very clean and readable, so people don't complain about being shot too much. So I'm not going to go for 100% one-to-one duplication of the Warzone Gulag. We just want to get that feel, we just want to get the layout, and make it look nice. Here to demonstrate the Gulag is Charlie R, being an absolute savage Swedish Viking. Look at him go. Watch out for that chicken leg, Charlie. You can download the mod at Nexus Mods, link is below. Thanks very much to Baby Sexy Monkey, Charlie, Dell, all the other guys at the Blade and Sorcery modding community for their help with Unity and Blade and Sorcery. Because this map was done in Unity, it was real easy to port it over to VR chat. So there's a link to the VR chat version of the map below. Hopefully we can turn it into some sort of nightclub, maybe with a riot mode. That would be fun. Also available, Baby Sexy Monkey's Gulag mod. This will function like the actual Warzone Gulag. The link for this is also available below. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. The Gulag. Thanks for watching.